So welcome back everyone. Now we will move on to Sabine. Sabine Hoffmann is a trained statistician, epidemiologist, and a psychologist, and currently deputy professor for biostatistics at the Ludwig Maximilians University, Munich, Germany. As a statistician, she wants to provide a guidance on how to apply research methods in a way to improve reproducibility. Among other things, she investigated methods to quantify and to report the effects of uncertain choices on the robustness of research findings. So without further ado, please welcome Sabine.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for having me. And sorry again for the technical problems. So yeah, I will be talking about the replication crisis and lessons learned across disciplines. And actually, my talk is based on a multidisciplinary collaboration I had with a psychologist, an economist, an epidemiologist, and a hydroclimatologist. And so basically, I will be talking about sources of uncertainty in empirical research and lessons learned across disciplines. So I think it has been amply discussed that there is a replication crisis in science that covers a lot of different disciplines, and basically we see that if you try to replicate findings, so you try to reproduce the results of a new sample, and you find less significant results and smaller effect sizes, and that's true in many disciplines. And so the two maybe culprits who have been around for a long time are publication bias and dissatisfaction with p-values. There has been also some discussions on fraud and scientific misconduct, but most people, I think, would agree that the biggest problem is that there is a multiplicity of possible analysis strategies or analysis pipelines, and that this can be combined with selective reporting. So what do I mean when I talk about a multiplicity of possible analysis strategies? I think that's really nicely illustrated by this recent experiment by Silbertan and Ullmann, who actually asked 29 teams of researchers to answer the same research question with the same data set. And the research question was, are football referees more likely to give red cards to players with dark skin than to players with light skin? And you see that none of the analysis teams actually obtained the same result. All of them chose different analysis strategies and came up with different results. And so actually these multi-analysis projects have been also done in fMRI research with the NARPS project, where they actually found the same results. And actually the COVID forecast can also be seen as a kind of naturalistic multi-analyst project, where here you see, for instance, the projections of the number of weekly deaths that had been submitted to the Center of Disease Control last year. And you see that the uncertainty intervals don't overlap, the projections go in different directions, even though researchers actually have access to the same data. So where does this multiplicity of possible analysis strategies come from? Well, actually, to investigate this question, we looked at two different research questions from really different disciplines. So on the left here, you had a question from epidemiology, which was, does meat intake increase the risk of colorectal cancer? That was actually widely discussed several years ago. And on the right, there was a question from hydroclimatology, where the idea was to predict the future mass in the Alps, given that there will be climate change. And so even though these research questions are really different, and also they have really different aims. So here on the left, the aim is actually to estimate a parameter vector to quantify the association between meat intake and colorectal cancer. And on the right, the aim is actually to make a prediction. So you want to predict the future water mass. And so even though the research questions are really different and the aims are really different, we're faced with the same choices. So basically, if we want to answer these research questions, we have to collect data, we have to find ways to collect them, we have to define input and outcome variables, and we have to handle outliers and missing values, and we have to do a lot of other data processing steps. And then once we have our data, we have to choose a model and choose, and so basically here what's true is that all models are wrong. So we have quite a lot of different, here on the left, adjustment variables or confounding variables we can adjust for. On the right, we have a lot of actually physical laws and mechanistic assumptions that we make to simplify the process. And so in the end, once we have our data in our model, we still have to choose method and method settings and a software package to run our estimations, or also to run our analyses and our simulations. And then we have to extrapolate and interpolate and smooth our results. So basically, even though these research questions are really different, we're faced with the same questions, and we're faced what Andrew called the garden of forking paths that creates a multiplicity of possible analysis strategies. And so what we try to do was link these decisions to sources of uncertainty. So basically, our two examples come from either explanatory modeling here on the left, where the idea is to conduct statistical inference on a parameter vector. So we have input variables and an outcome, and we try to estimate the association between them while accounting for other variables. And on the right, we have an instance of predictive modeling where we actually try to predict something. And this is mechanistic predictive modeling because we make a lot of mechanistic assumptions based on our understanding of climatology. But there's also a third type of modeling, which is agnostic predictive modeling, which is gaining a lot of popularity in form of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But basically, these three types of modeling approaches cover most of empirical research, and we're faced with the same source of uncertainty. So here on the left, our statistical inference methods, be it p-values or Bayes factors or confidence intervals, usually account for sampling uncertainty. So they account for the fact that we only have a sample from a larger population of interest, but they don't account for the fact that we don't know our data generating mechanism perfectly. So we have model uncertainty because we don't have a perfect understanding, but our methods usually don't address this model uncertainty. Also, here on the left, we usually have parameter uncertainty. So we might have smoothing parameters, or in hydroclimatology, we have parameters like the initial density of the snow that we have to choose, but we don't know which value is the good one or the best one. And then usually we can't measure our input variables perfectly. So we have a lot of measurement uncertainty, but we don't account for it. And because we have this measurement uncertainty, we have to do a lot of data preprocessing, because basically when we have outliers or missing values, so no measurements at all, we don't know whether we should exclude these values or how we should proceed. And in the end, we also have this method uncertainty because we have different software implementations to run our models. And so how do these sources of uncertainty interact to create unreplicable findings? So basically, measurement uncertainty and sampling uncertainty are not really under the control of the researcher, but they create a variability in results when we apply the strategy on different samples. So basically, and also they create a variation between the results with different analysis pipelines. And so if we combine this variability with these other four sources of uncertainty that are rather epistemic, but because they're due to a lack of knowledge, we can just do a selective reporting of our analysis pipeline based on the results. So basically, here on our first sample, we will say, well, I really liked strategy B because it gave me a really surprising and significant result. So I'll choose this one. And then if somebody tries to replicate this finding, he might not succeed to do so, because we have here the effect of selective reporting. Right, so what can we do about this? What are the lessons that we can learn across disciplines? So what's sure is that we have these sources of uncertainty, and we will get overconfidence in result if we only account for sampling uncertainty. So basically, our solutions need to address these sources of uncertainty. And so conceptually, the easiest strategy to address these sources of uncertainty is to reduce them. Because basically, if I reduce them, then I will decrease the effect of selective reporting. So reducing uncertainty can be in the form of increasing the sample size. So that's a solution that has been widely proposed in psychology and epidemiology. We can improve our measurements because that will decrease our measurement uncertainty. But then there's other things we can do. We can integrate existing knowledge, because rarely we're the first one to consider a research question. Normally there's ample evidence already in the literature. For instance, on my question on meat intake in colorectal cancer, there are about 100 studies that already exist. So I could integrate this evidence to address my sources of uncertainty. Other things that have been discussed basically a lot in sociology and psychology is to have more precise theories. So there's a better mapping of our theoretical concepts and our data. Then in biology, there has been a lot of ideas to standardize experimental conditions, because basically one of the reasons that has been identified that can explain the non-replicability of preclinical research that I showed in the beginning is that so one of the reasons is that in research, usually antibodies are not really well characterized. And then in the pharmaceutical companies, there's more money to characterize them well. And so that might explain why these research findings, these basic research findings can't be replicated. Right, and in general, if I reduce my sources of uncertainty, for instance, by standardizing these experimental conditions or by having larger sample size and more precise measurements, I can just decrease this variability, and then I can also decrease the effect of selective reporting. Right, so reducing uncertainty is conceptually really simple, but it's unfortunately, it might be quite expensive to just have a larger sample size and to have more precise measurements. So another option that's conceptually simple is to report uncertainty. So classically, that would be done in the sensitivity analysis, where I basically say, okay, I don't know which smoothing technique I should use, or I don't know which software package, but I'll just show you the results of both. And in recent years, there have been proposals to do this in a more systematic fashion in different disciplines, so mainly in psychology and in epidemiology. And sometimes two approaches from really different disciplines actually are quite similar. So here again, we have epidemiology and climatology, where these are ways to report model uncertainty, either through multi-model projections or here through the so-called vibrational effects, where you see the effect estimate here, a hazard ratio in a Cox regression model, and minus log 10 the p-value, and basically you see the effect of all different models. And so in one of our projects with John Ioannidis and Chirag Patel, we actually extended this vibration of effects framework to be able to compare it to measurement uncertainty, because that's really a big issue in epidemiology, and to compare it to sampling uncertainty, because that's something we're intuitively familiar with. And what we saw here are three associations between three variables and all-cause mortality. And what we saw that when we increased the sample size naturally, as we might expect, sampling uncertainty decreased, but we saw that in some occasions, measurement and model uncertainty remained non-negligible. So it was not, they couldn't be eliminated just by increasing the sample size. Right, so reducing and reporting uncertainty are both conceptually quite simple, but they don't, especially reporting uncertainty is nice because it gives transparency and it shows us the robustness of our findings. But the problem is that it doesn't answer our research question of interest. So basically, it doesn't provide us a unique answer. It just shows us a lot of different answers depending on the analysis pipeline. And so going a step further, instead of simply just reporting uncertainty, we can integrate uncertainty. And so common ways to integrate uncertainty are, for instance, through Bayesian model averaging, where we can integrate model uncertainty, so we can provide a single answer to a research question while accounting for this uncertainty. Method uncertainty can, for instance, be integrated in superlearners where different machine learning algorithms so the predictions are just averaged and weighted by the out-of-sample predictive performance. And so basically, these, and there's also ways to account for parameter and measurement uncertainty. And here it's always easier to be Bayesian, because Bayesian statisticians accept to describe all types of uncertainty by probability, whereas frequentists are kind of, they restrict their definition of probability to repeatable events. And so in my own research, I'm actually also interested in measurement uncertainty in comets. So basically that goes with the picture I showed you in the beginning with the different predictions. So one reason why these predictions are different, well, obviously they're different because there's different models. So they have model uncertainty, they're different parameter values and parameter uncertainty. But it's also interesting that actually we're faced with a big problem of measurement uncertainty in COVID modeling, because we're interested in the number of true infections in a given country and on a given day, but that's not something I can measure. So there's 3 common indicators that are associated with this number of infections. Here in dark blue, you have the number of deaths. In light blue, you have the number of reported cases. And in middle blue, you have the number of occupied hospital beds. And so basically here for Italy, you see that, well, if there were good indicators, they should be parallel. So all 3 indicators should give the same result. But you see that obviously that's not true. So here, the light blue curve, the number of reported cases, was really small. So here the number of deaths are multiplied by 20, by the way. So here you see that in the first wave, the number of reported cases was much lower than you would expect. Well, that was because of a limited testing capacity and underreporting. And then you see that now the situation is changing again. Now the number of reported cases are going up, but the number of deaths are staying low. So that's basically because some people are vaccinated now and have a lower infection fatality rate. But so if different modeling approaches use different indicators, then they will get different results. And what we can do in a Bayesian hierarchical approach is, well, to account for vaccinations, to account for different variants. So this is the wild type, this is alpha, this is delta, and for seasonality. And then we can do a complicated Bayesian hierarchical model. And so this is a bit overwhelming, but what's important is that here we have a latent variable that's the true number of infections, and that's linked to the number of deaths, hospitalizations, and reported cases. And here we can model the information of all 3 indicators at the same time, and we can account for the uncertainty that we have in 3 indicators at the same time. And then we can link that to the rest of the model. And what we get in the end is that we can actually, if we do posterior predictive checks, we can see that our reported cases, death, hospital occupancies, and ICU occupancies are really described well, because we account for the uncertainty and the underreporting. And as a byproduct, we also get the case detection ratios that are actually quite in accordance with the number of tests performed to detect an infection. So this, and actually, if we want to address data preprocessing uncertainty, that's also a way we could do it, because we have a latent concept and we want to link it to observable quantities that are linked to that latent concept, but we don't really know how, and we have some uncertainty in there. Okay, so this is about integrating uncertainty. And then just to finish, if we can't reduce, report, or integrate, then we have to accept uncertainty. And there are some common approaches now to accept uncertainty. One would be pre-registration, where you basically say, okay, I know that there's this forking path, there's this multiplicity of possible analysis strategies, so I'll just pre-register my analysis plan, so at least I can make sure that I won't selectively report my results based on the analysis strategies based on the results. Another way of accepting uncertainty is actually to say, well, one study is not enough. You can't answer research question conclusively just based on one study. So you need replication studies and meta-analysis and multiple lines of evidence, or you need to move to p smaller 0.005. Right, so after a multidisciplinary project, we kind of thought, okay, what's the recommendations to make your own research more replicable? Well, the first step is actually to be aware of the multiplicity of possible analysis strategies and with the problems of selective reporting. And then, if possible, you should reduce the sources of uncertainty before the analysis and integrate the remaining sources of uncertainty into the analyses, even though this is not always straightforward. And then you should report the results of alternative analysis strategies to assess the robustness of results and acknowledge the inherent uncertainty in your findings. And then, of course, your research is more credible if you publish all research code data and material. Right, so to conclude, well, in the short term, lack of replication is actually just embarrassing, but on the long run, it has devastating consequences on the credibility of research findings. And I think that the COVID pandemic kind of showed how important it is for the scientific community to retain credibility. And we think that multidisciplinary efforts are actually essential to avoid reinventing the wheel in every discipline. Thank you for your attention, and sorry again for my technical problems.